Welcome, Andrew, to the official inaugural podcast here.
Thanks
for
for having me.
VeloCity, for exact. Let's take a minute and introduce yourself.
Sure.
Marketplace.city.
Sure. Hi, I'm Andrew Watkins, the co-founder and COO of Marketplace.city. Marketplace.city is a platform to help governments find, evaluate, and ultimately buy technology products and services. So in the same way that you or I would go on Amazon and might look up, hey, I want to get this tablet or wireless headphones, which one's the best fit for me? I can see who's out there, see all the user reviews, how they're using it, the pricing. The public sector has no sort of equivalent way to do that research. They're hearing it either from their friends and peers in other cities or from vendors, directly from vendors and only from vendors, and that's not always giving them a full picture of the market of how they perform. So we have a website that does this, and then associated services for cities that helps them answer three questions, and those three are: what are my peers using? How are those services and technologies performing? And ultimately, how can I buy it?
Okay. What one? I think you solve more problems than like Amazon.com. Because part of what Amazon does also is like align buyers, sellers, then handle fulfillment, and makes the transaction easy.
Yep.
So what are some things that you're doing to help make that transaction easier for people to actually so I identify something I want to buy?
Yeah. So it's different in the consumer world than in a regulated market like government. So in the consumer world, Amazon can do that through you being able to click and buy with a credit card, and then they can fulfill from any network they want. In the public sector, there's a lot of different ways. And so when we say that, how do I buy? It's actually showing the government entity the different options they have, right? So there may be, hey, this thing that you're looking at is $10,000 and it's below your discretionary threshold of $20,000. So if you have a budget for it, you can just write a PO and buy it. That's your rule. It may be, hey, this is something that has a state level contract. The state of Illinois, for example, has 3 state level streetlight contracts. If that is something they're searching, this is a state level contract. Here's the contract, here's the pricing, here's the name of the person you go to. It's not one-click buy, it's still going to take some amount of time, but it is shortening that amount of things. There are other ways, though, and these rules vary from state to state, municipality to municipality, but it's showing a lot of the things of what are the different options related to cooperative purchasing or piggybacking, or is this something that is something I can just go out and get quotes for? And showing different procurement processes and options, and that's why, it is in a regulated market, higher touch and a little bit different than in the consumer market, because there's a lot of showing and educating people on their different options once they've decided, yes, this product or this technology type is something I need.
Okay. Why did you and Chris start Marketplace?
Yeah, so it's sort of an interesting, and I think all good startups are a little bit of serendipity too. So so Marketplace.city actually started as a beta within the city of New York. So it came from an idea of actually a group of cities sitting around saying, what would the e-commerce shopping experience look like for the public sector? And they, at one of those city workshops, sketched out over 2 hours what kinds of things what's missing right now and what kinds of things you need. And sat on the shelf for a few months, and then eventually someone in the Mayor's Office of Innovation and Technology, a guy named Jeff Merritt, who was the Director of Innovation at the time, launched a pilot to demo that at the 2016 Smart Cities Week, and it was the original version of our product was Marketplace.NYC, which was a really a taxonomy and an organization of the city and how the city thought and tried to solve problems. Not a perfect replica, but the best they could do of like, here's how a city thinks, which isn't necessarily, and structure, which is not necessarily how we see it as like a monolithic thing. Taking it into all the different departments and those sorts of pieces, and then sort of a listing of the vendors, their capabilities, whether they were working with New York. The beta had sort of basic functionality. And from there, they actually presented it at the 2016 White House Smart Cities Week, and New York pushed it around to a lot of their other peer cities. They were working at the time, and still are, to try to show other cities, hey, here's how we can use technology to better serve our citizens, to better improve operations, those sorts of things. And there was a lot of interest from other cities of like, well, can you give us this? Can you give us the code? And the way the beta was structured wasn't, that wasn't something that cities were going to be able to do and run on their own. And New York, in their wisdom, knew that they couldn't run a startup as the city of New York. They can do, but they knew they couldn't run a startup, and so wanted to sort of have it be its own entity, and that's actually where Chris and I got involved. So Cameron, our CTO and our third partner, had done data with New York from the private sector, and Cameron and I knew each other from college, and so we knew each other for 20 years, and we're just talking about the different things we were working on, catching up, and I was helping, I was at UI Labs here in Chicago, working with some smart city stuff for the City Tech Collaborative. We were talking about that stuff, and he said, hey, I got this thing, the city wants to take it forward, you know more people in this space, I don't, so I can't take it forward by myself, does anyone want it? And Chris and I had been introduced, and I sort of floated the idea to him of this platform and this company exists out there, and this idea goes forward. And honestly, none of us were necessarily immediately looking to do this, but we recognized from all of our past experience the sort of gap in the market, and that there was something there if the cities were going to support it, and had a great initial backer in New York and a bunch of our other early partner cities, Atlanta, Dublin, Barcelona, about 20 others who joined soon afterward. And that sort of got it off and rolling, and I think the timeline of that all just sort of had conversations that otherwise might not have happened, and things, and just where we're in our life cycle. But it's a big gap in the market. When I tell people what we're doing, they think to themselves in a consumer mindset and say, well, how can that not exist?
Yeah, and I love it, by the way, and then I think one of the things that we've learned in smart cities over the last couple of years is the market education, right, that you described, is really having that neutral third party that can help vet technologies and also make sure that they're vetted by the customers,
yep.
Right? And then anything that can help both illuminate and accelerate the procurement process. Yep. Is obviously a huge pain point on both sides of the market. Cities want to buy things they can't, vendors want to sell things, it makes it difficult. So I'm a huge fan of what you guys are doing. Tell me a case study, from an end-to-end customer that you've been able to take through the process and was something you would be able to,
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, it's a recent one, but it, different than where it directly started with, our launch, but also Marketplace.city of just, hey, it's the cities being able to go search, again, in the same way, directly replicating what, we do as consumers or businesses do on, B2B review sites and those kind of things. But we started, as you said, getting deeper into what content and information is needed in each of those steps of what's out there, the validations, how it's performing, and the procurement piece. And in that procurement piece, we started working a lot more closely with cities, and so with the city of Aurora, Illinois, they, had a need, and there's a long backstory here. I won't go into them wanting to get solar powered garbage cans, and not just because they're cool and smart city, but because they had a real need in. They send 2 public works employees through all the garbage cans in every park 4 days a week, including on Sunday where it's a double time expense to pick up garbage. Depending on the weather and how many people use it and all those things, mostly those cans were empty. Or there were many times when those cans were empty. Or there'd been a festival and they could plan for those because those are known events that they're probably going to be full and maybe schedule an extra one. And they knew from Public Works and Parks and Employment being out there that they even had a test connected to trash can in the past, that there were ways to get all that information. And so the Public Works and Parks Department came to the CIO of Aurora and said, we want to get these solar powered trash cans, please write an RFP. And he said, wait a minute. I don't know what you want to do with it. What you've shown is, one example. If we write an RFP based on this is going to be the only company that applies. This is a huge waste of time. We've been working with Mike Heidi's on a variety of other things. He said, let's use this marketplace process that we've been developing with them. And so what basically that process was is they told us, here's the outcome they wanted. Here's any requirements they had. For example, they had to be new trash cans because they were replacing 55-gallon open drums. So they can't just retrofit with a sensor that tells you it's full because they decided open drums were not, very good for the environment and rodents get into them and all sorts of other reasons you might want to replace them. And then, what they were looking for. And we did a full market search, looked at, using data from on and off our site, came back with 22 plus companies that were relatively in the stage, scored them by what they were able to do, and then matched them to different contracts and pricing options. And what they found was there were actually only 2 or 3 companies that were anywhere close to what they wanted, which was solar powered, connected with the specification they wanted, and in a way where they could be as a service, where they were limiting the capital up front to just install and then paying monthly as a service rather than having to buy it outright and pay maintenance fees. And so all of that, sounds it would take well over a year usually to get from contract to execution,
And a whole lot of time on
and
the
a whole lot of
city's
time
part.
on the city's part and on all of those vendors' part. With pretty low touch, we're able to get to the vendors that have the potential capabilities, match them with appropriate contracts for Aurora. So not just, hey, Big Belly has a contract in New York City, Aurora, here it is. Aurora and New York City are not the same, but Spokane, Washington, and Lakewood, Colorado, in parks departments, look actually very similar to Aurora. The same number, same densities, those kind of things. And we're able to show them that. They were able to see there were only this handful. They found one of the companies best fit them, and in a 4-month process, we're able to make a decision and go into the contracting. So what would normally take them a year is sort of limited to 4 months.
So what strikes me in that is that you helped vet not just new emerging technology, but also the right contracting process and vehicle and examples that would align with that, right? Which I think one thing we found is that the technology often comes last, right? It's what is the outcome and the priority of the city? What are they trying to solve for, and then figure out the right ways to do that. So tell me one that hasn't gone so well. Like, what's a lesson learned, or something that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because still a lot of our structure and things that we're trying to do are scaled after examples of consumer and business marketplace, and I think that's a good thing, right? Everyone should not reinvent the wheel. That's what our whole business is based on: copying your peers and not reinventing the wheel. I think there are, but this is sort of something that. All of the metrics and things, even if you're modeling after a marketplace and say, oh, but it's government, it'll take a little bit longer, still some of the same metrics don't hold up. The way consumer and enterprise marketplaces work from number of users and traffic and those kind of things, and growth patterns, they just don't work in the public sector in the same way. It is you're constantly, and we hear this from both governments and other government or tech CEOs and business people, you're selling against the perception of risk. And so the ability to get people to adopt stuff initially, they understand it and know it on the surface, and then their ability to adopt it sort of takes a lot longer. And I think we we figured if we can start people down the path, you can show them the path to the end and be able to trailblaze that in their own way. If we could show them, here's who your peers are working with, and here is really what's on the market and how's it performing. Here are the good paths to take, that they would enter into those relationships, and it was basically just defragmenting a very complex industry, and that the best people to solve that were the buyer and the seller. Didn't realize that starting off how much certainly we knew there'd be some role for us, but that's something that we probably underestimated early on, and thus had a lot that got started and people were really interested, and then would get to this procurement wall basically, and it would stop.
I feel that pain.
Yeah, I
Here.
That's exactly right.
So maybe boil down one nugget of insight or advice, one for startups, or not just startups, but maybe vendors in the space, and then some guidance for cities.
Yeah. So I think, macro vendors, and I talk about startups too. I mean, the vendor piece, and the piece that I find really interesting in this space, is you need to be clear and transparent about what you're offering and what you're going to do. And I think obviously as a startup, when a startup is starting and they're still figuring that out, like, hey, yeah, one of those things might be, we think generally it's this outcome, and here's how we're going to do it. Let's partner and do it. And that's fine. You don't have to know the full playbook. I am constantly surprised, though, at the number of companies, big, small, of all stripes, who try to hide their information from the public sector. For example, you can go to a lot of websites of GovTech companies, and it'll say, here are case studies and list their medallions, and you can click on them, and it'll give you one sentence, and then you have to enter your information to download it. In some states, that is a violation of their procurement law because they are giving an individual vendor a leg up because they know you're looking. Even though they might not have any budget for those kind of things, it's probably not technically a violation. Some legal department at some point has told them that puts a stop to their process of looking at you. So inherently, by you trying to capture that for your CRM and not putting it out there, you have lost the chance to educate that person on who you are. And so I find it very, in what's supposed to be an open and transparent market, very closed off from both sides. Governments don't want to talk about what they're doing, about violating those limits, and vendors. We learned all the consumer market the things aren't, and B2B markets aren't going to work in the private sector. The things you do selling to the private enterprises aren't going to work exactly right. Your previous sales are still your best lead engine. Use them, but you got to actually get them out there, and you got to find different ways to do it. So I think that's the biggest thing for like vendors generally. I think specifically to the startups is you certainly should talk to other vendors and people who've been in the industry a long time about to learn, your customer and your history, those kind of things. Listening to how they go about selling is probably not a good work. The bigger vendors have a process and a structure and a size to use the existing RFPs, those processes. I'm not saying those things are all wrong or all terrible, but they know how to play that and have the financial wherewithal to wait it out. You don't. And so you need to use all the different mechanisms and understand that there are ways to move faster in pilots, thinking about how you're doing your business, your pricing and those things that are different from theirs. Thinking about how you use piggybacking and cooperative purchasing or other sorts of things. And because just following the playbook they've used forever is not going to give you the results you want. And then on the city side, I think it's, and we're seeing this more and more, which is great, is be willing to listen and change. And we're seeing a lot more change agents that know they can't survive without some of the new, it's not technology sake. They need technology or new business models as an enabler to results they can't now achieve or have always struggled to achieve. And there's more people willing to listen of like, well, maybe these, these new companies offer something new.
A lot of great wisdom in that.
I know, sorry.
A couple things in that, the advice to sort of the difference, I guess, between a startup or an early stage company, small and we're trying to sell work through that process in comparison to, say, the large enterprise you mentioned that has the long-term wherewithal and patience, I think, to get through that. But when I look at the space now, I see a growing graveyard of companies in the smart city space, both from startups that haven't made the curve of getting through some of the barriers, breaking in the barriers we're talking about, but also when I look at Verizon, kind of folding their smart cities business into public sector now. Again, that vehicle that's already in place, long-term contracts with cities that they can leverage. Cisco's had some challenges. I think, pick a large company that came out smart cities. There's a lot of pullback now. Am I off? One, and two, what are some of the trends that you're seeing now in the smart city space, and where do you think the industry's headed?
Yeah, so I think you're right in that sense of, and I think the term smart city sometimes does this disservice because really it is public sector technology, and so especially the big companies having two groups that were ultimately trying to do the same thing, naturally they're going to have overlap and synergy. So I do see that happening. I think the biggest trend that I'm sort of seeing is, and I think is, out there is like the era of a single big provider to a government entity and providing big systems with long tails and maintenance is, not fully over because there's a lot of those systems out there. Ones in big cities is over and has been, dying generally because it's not good for anyone. Those cities cannot afford it and they cannot continue to maintain it. It's not giving them the results they need. And ultimately, it's not good for the vendors too. Building in all those individual custom systems became impossible to prop up, and a lot of the companies suffered for that too. I mean, there were bad results as a result. The the big federal ones you hear about with the Department of Homeland or Defense. Cities, vendors serving individual cities. And so I think in the technology space, understanding that there's going to be a lot of companies operating, a lot of smaller, point solutions, for lack of a better word, even though it's not, perfect example of what they are, operating within a system, within a city that need to find a way to talk to each other but are solving those specific problems, is much more likely it's going to be. Over an arc of 5, 10, 20 years, there will be some things that become the platform to integrate those kind of things, and people may look at those as the monolithic, but the reality is there's going to be a lot of smaller interchangeable parts with, at least the option for shorter term change out. Whether government takes that or not is a different question.
I agree with that, and the trend we see, cities are incredibly complex. Right? The fire department is much different than public works, it's different than 311, it's different than health and human services. And so I don't think we'll ever get out of sort of those individual silos and solutions that sort of solve at the departmental level, at the practice level. And initially we came to this space thinking we would be that platform in the middle, and realized that creates a lot of challenges for organizations in the city. But what we see now is write the requirements for openness at that departmental level and systems level. So instead of needing a big monolithic thing to bring it together, as these new technologies emerge, make them open by default. We get at the data so that later when you need to bring different things together, you can do that.
You have the options to do it. I think that's exactly right. And a lot of people are getting smarter to that. Here's the guidelines for new technology that's going to come in. It can't be proprietary systems and proprietary. It doesn't all have to be open in the sense that the code base is all open, but the data has to be shareable to the other public sector entities at a minimum that are within that city or government, probably with other external. And sometimes the public, depending on what the data is, there's it is ultimately a lot of it is ultimately. And there are certain things that we probably don't want fully open, but exactly.
So last question, we'll call this the no filter question, which is this straight shoot. What is something in the space right now, or in your experience, that you think is just whacked, or mind-boggling?
It's a little bit to what we do as a company, but I think everyone not standing up and saying that the public sector procurement process is just not designed for the things we're doing in technology. It is designed and built around commodities and construction, which technology just inherently isn't. We're doing these things that don't have you have a fixed end goal, not a fixed end scope, right? You're not building a building, you're not building a road. And so therefore the things around it, which is then the biggest pieces of procurement and those rules of this process of an RFI and an RFP and an exact price and then an exact contract timeline just don't work for it, because in the timelines that it sets out, your offering has changed. And so even your response by the time to contract we've rolled out new stuff, you're getting different stuff now. It's not, run on Amazon Cloud, 6.1. Now it's on Amazon Cloud 6.1. You're technically Look, that's not a knock on government and the public sector. The procurement process is set up for great reasons, transparency and fairness, because they're spending other people's money. Consumer can move fast. You're doing your own thing. As long as you're not hurting other people, you're spending your own thing. Businesses have a smaller set of stakeholders. Even big public companies have a smaller set of stakeholders. That's not true in the public sector. The entire thing within their boundaries is their stakeholders, whether they're paying into it or not. The people that transit through it are still their stakeholders. And so I think there is governments have recognized, okay, this process doesn't quite work for this, and so there are lots of various, tools, for lack of a better word, I just mentioned earlier, cooperative purchasing and piggybacking and justified sole sources and other reasons. And so it's not about, we're sneaking around the process. There's one is, let's use the tools as they exist today and fit them, because they know there's going to be certain things. Technology isn't such a unicorn, right? architecture firms have always fallen under this because you can't exactly tell how many versions of the drawing you're going to need.
Right.
You need the number of versions you're going to need. And so they know there's workarounds. So let's use the tools that are in our toolkit today, and then we have to adapt the process, because those that don't, technology continues to move faster and faster. Government can't afford, not just from we're not serving our citizens, or we're not giving young people who grew up with digital natives the stuff they expect. They actually can't afford, on some of the costs, the ability to not adopt some of these things that at times are taking their cost structures down by 90%.
Wow.
When they're doing it. And so understanding that to buy $50,000 of software to take 2 years to do it when the payback is $100,000 a year is a bad.
So there's a big opportunity.
There's a big opportunity. And so it's finding the tools, taking the time, taking a breath for your one individual need or solution, and figuring out the best way to procure it. And then the macro piece of starting the conversation of, we need to update some of these processes. And the interesting thing is that I say that as a sort of no filter. People know it. People say it. And some even say it in big public settings. But it's we have the ability to do it. Let's just not throw up our hands and do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. We touched on something before this about one of the things that drives me nuts is when I see an RFP description that looks interesting.
Yeah.
And I go to the website, the city site. It directs me to a third-party site. And I've got to spend 15 minutes entering in our information, and then $15 or to download the thing just to see if it's interesting, right? Why is that?
Yeah, it's one of those interesting of technology and get online, build websites, and then they're contracting with procurement providers or providers, and then they don't have the cycle times to update it and improve them, and so that's why on like the website front, you see 15-year-old websites, and you're like, yeah, because you were probably leading edge at the time, and now it's certainly not. But I think they get sold this basket of good of, hey, we're going to take away all of your cost, and we're gonna post it, and we'll make it available to everyone. But they make them purposefully hard to get the sort of free version, and it's this goes to a sort of general piece for the public sector. Like these, you need to. It's not adversarial. It shouldn't be adversarial between a city and a vendor. It should be a partnership, and you need to pick your partners wisely and understand the things they're doing with your information and your things to make money. Those vendors should be making money, and they can give you things away for free, and use the process or the data to make money, but only if it's something that aligns with your values too. And I don't think a lot of with some of these, they're shown, see, look, as a new vendor, you can just create all your things. We'll give you back all this reporting. They type in they're interested, and then within 24 hours, they get to download the document. What they don't realize is if you want to do that for multiple cities, then you have to pay. And most of us are probably selling to more than for the era of a city is dying or dead, and so they work across multiple.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point earlier about a lot of these processes are set up for you're building something new. You're building a road, you're putting in an intersection, you're building. You're going to source that generally through local contractors. So running,
and that actually makes a lot of sense.
Right. Stuff we do isn't specific.
Well, I think it's that the person who is designing your building, or there could be the best designer and the best builder and the best. You're not going to pay for the best landscaper to come from Miami to Chicago to put in flowers. You're going to pick the best one that's local, and that actually makes a lot of sense at economic development. A best-in-breed software that can be delivered over those things has fundamentally different characteristics that you are willing to do that. In the same way that people treat best-in-breed security and those kind of things, because they can be delivered in those. They don't need to be local, and so I do think that's part of the adoption. Again, the local priorities and small businesses, minority-owned business, women-owned business, veteran-owned business. Those things are still good, play a role, and are fundamental. You shouldn't be sub-optimizing taxpayer dollars to achieve those by big amounts, right? Well, let's go with this local business, even though they're only giving us 10% of what we want because they're local, versus the person who can give us 100% of what we want.
Right.
No citizen wants that trade-off. Like, that's not worth it. That's governments know that. I'm using, big examples, but it's one of those things that, again, talking about the process and having the education process, people will start to see there are other ways.
Awesome. Well, I could ask another 20 questions, but any closing parting thoughts?
Nah, I mean, I think, generally, I think it's people who are, in this market just gotta keep plugging away. It's, I don't think people who are, yes, and people that are doing it, look, I mean, in the same way, most of the people we interact with, and I'm sure it's true of you as well, that are the public sector, public servants, they could get other jobs. They're not just doing this to collect a paycheck or collect a pension. They are trying to actively do something for their city, and that's, I'm sure there are bad apples in there, but they're bad apples in all bushels. People are trying to do it, and so we as the company are trying to do it. You're probably not in the government, tech of 2019 to make a quick buck, because it's not quick. Yeah. But you're trying to achieve something that changes the way something is and make something better. And yes, we're businesses, and we get paid for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris.